I have Patrick Geoghegan. Patrick is a Senior Vice President of Corporate Communications for the Wisconsin Milk Marketing Board. His responsibilities include national advertising, public relations, social media, and online efforts and the activities of the Wisconsin Dairy Council. Prior to joining the Wisconsin Milk Marketing Board, Patrick was Vice President and Director of Stephan Brady, a Madison advertising and public relations firm. He began his career as a journalist in Wisconsin, Montana, and New York. Please give a round of applause to our speaker, our first speaker today, Patrick. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. When Julie invited me to this opportunity, I had no idea what I was getting into. This is really exciting. It's so impressive to see so many people out on a somewhat challenging morning. I left Madison this morning at about 5 a.m. And it's hard to believe, but the weather is worse south of here. A lot of fog, but I'm glad I'm here, and I have a lot to share with you. I'm going to start off with basically a timeline telling the story of the development of the dairy industry. And then we're going to look at some of the current trends and issues, and then I'll end with a short video. By show of hands, can you tell me how many of you have worked in the dairy industry yourselves? So, it looks like maybe about 20%. And I'll bet it's higher than that, actually, because the dairy industry has some very long tentacles in the state of Wisconsin, which is different than most other states. We're going to talk about how we got to be America's dairy land and where we're headed. So with that, let's get going. If I can find the button that was given to me. Here we go. Anybody know what this is? This is probably why we're all here today. This is a chinch bug, and the chinch bug killed the wheat industry in the state of Wisconsin. We used to be the nation's leading producer of wheat back in the 1850s. The chinch bug moved slowly across the country from the east and killed the wheat industry here, and we needed to find something else to do, and we eventually did. So this is how I want to roll this out. We're going to look at it as a timeline. Cheese making, milking cows used to be considered women's work. Men didn't do it. And once it was discovered over time that we could make money by milking cows, the men took over. And it hasn't been the same since. This is interesting. I love maps. I love history, of course, and that's why Julie invited me, I think, when I told her I loved history and wanted to tell this story about the dairy industry in Wisconsin. This is from 1839, and it's hard to see, but there are no dots in the state of Wisconsin at this time. So there is virtually no dairy industry at all in 1839. As you can see, it's pretty healthy in the Northeast, primarily New York State, Pennsylvania, some of the smaller states that we started with, the original 13. But it wouldn't be long before Wisconsin really took off. It didn't always look very good. Here's a guy milking cows out in his yard, a pile of manure out the door. European immigrants coming to the United States, mostly Germans. Germans came somewhat later, in the 1850s to 1880s, and I'll bet that many of you are obviously lifelong learners, and you read a lot of history. So if my facts are wrong today, keep it to yourself. Annie Pickett is credited with being the first cheesemaker in the state of Wisconsin. She did it she had a few cows of her own, and then she talked to her neighbors and got their milk, and together she produced some butter and cheese. And what the 2 or 3 families that were involved couldn't consume, they sent to Milwaukee and sold it, shared the profits. She was from Lake Mills. This is a photo of a farm outside of Stoughton. There was a tremendous photographer back in the day. His name was Dahl, D-A-H-L. And he took a lot of photos of families in those days. As you can see by the slide, 90% of the population in the state at that time lived on farms. Any guess as to what the percentage is today who live on farms? Less than 2%. It's amazing how this has changed. Less than 2% of the population is responsible for producing virtually all the food for the United States population. So what I find interesting in that photo is you can see they've got all the cows. They've got, I think, 6 hired men, or probably 5 hired men and 1 owner. And many times, as you know, as you look at these photos, sometimes the family would pull out furniture from the house because they were showing everything that they had accomplished in their time in the United States. So there's equipment, farm equipment there. There's horses, cows, everything. So getting back to the wheat industry, Cyrus McCormick developed his reaper, and then J.I. Case came along down in Racine and developed a reaper as well, and that made the whole operation much, much more efficient, and the state's production of wheat just grew by leaps and bounds. But there was a problem. The problem was that there weren't many cows to milk and to get the manure from. And over time, the soil was depleted, and not only did the chinch bug kill the wheat industry, but the lack of fertilizer also killed the industry. But getting back to the reaper here, we often talk at the Wisconsin Milk Marketing Board about the impact the dairy industry has in the state of Wisconsin. And it's not just how much milk we produce or how much cheese we produce. It's all the other organizations and businesses and industries that rose up to support the industry. And of course, down in Racine, they had thousands of employees building these machines to support agriculture. And so that has continued today. But why wheat? Well, the pioneers who came across from the east, from Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York primarily, this is what they knew. And so they planted wheat, and they could pretty much forget about it until it was ready to be harvested. And then in the meantime, they could build fence and pull rocks and stumps and prepare the land for the next planting season. But of course, by 1860, it was pretty much, well, not quite over, but that was the high watermark for wheat production in the state of Wisconsin. After that, production declined rather precipitously, but of course, there were those that continued to hold on. There was some diversification in the state at that time. One of the most interesting chapters in Wisconsin's ag history, I think, because it has an impact on my hometown. There was a lot of hops grown in the state of Wisconsin in the 1860s, particularly. At one time, I grew up in Baraboo, Wisconsin, on a small farm south of town out by Devil's Lake. At one time, Sauk County alone produced 25% of the nation's hops. But that only lasted for about 10 years. By 1868, the more pests had come in and basically killed the market in the state of Wisconsin. But interestingly, there's still a lot of hops growing in the county. My dad's small farm, we found some hops growing in a fence row. So our guesstimate is that may have been some hops that was grown or planted over 100 years ago. And my brother and I have great plans to make some beer someday. I noticed that when I came in this morning, there was a name badge that said Up in Smoke, and then at the bottom it said Cheese and Beer. I want to hang out with the people that signed up for those courses. Hiram Smith was a tremendous influence on the state of Wisconsin's dairy evolution. He eventually became a member of the Board of Regents, but he was one of the first men to develop a full-scale cheese factory. He's one of the 7 saints of the dairy industry in Wisconsin. Another one is Chester Hazen. Some of you may have read about Hazen's folly. He had this grand idea that he could buy milk from a variety of farms and make cheese with that milk. And before long, even though he was ridiculed roundly for this crazy notion, he started to make cheese and started to make money. 300 cows at that time, as you imagine. The average herd size in this era might have been a couple of cows, maybe 5, 6 cows. And of course, today the herd average in the state of Wisconsin is 132. The average herd size in California is over 1,000. And the largest average herd size in the state is in New Mexico, with over 1,300 cows per farm. So, despite what you may have read, Wisconsin is still very much a state of small family farms. But still, at 132, the average herd size in the state of Wisconsin has tripled in the last 25 years. And the number of farms is down, and we'll cover that as we move through this presentation. So there was a lot of development. One of the things that Wisconsin prides itself on and other states envy is the infrastructure that we enjoy. And so we've been building this amazing infrastructure for the dairy industry for more than 100 years. The Wisconsin Dairymen's Association was formed by some of the people that you just saw on the previous slides. Also, notice the old cheese factory that you see there. And we'll look at some more cheese factories as we go through here. But they're all very similar in design. And we'll talk about that a little bit. John Jossi, we talk about Wisconsin originals. Dodge County is the home of Jossi, where he developed brick cheese. Brick cheese is Wisconsin original. We also developed another cheese in the state of Wisconsin, just south of here, I believe. Or is Colby north of here? West, thank you. It's on Highway 29 or just off 29. I should know that. So this is a picture of a cheesemaker, probably in Greene County, making Swiss cheese. Colby cheese, as I said, was developed by John Steinwand. I think it was probably a mistake. Other people disagree. But what happened is that Steinwand, his father was away, and he was to make cheese that day. And the difference between Colby and cheddar is that Colby is a washed cheese, so they wash the curd quickly. And I suspect that he may have added too much salt to that batch and wanted to save it before Dad got home. And that was how Colby was born, I think, but other people disagree. W.D. Horde. W.D. Horde was probably the most influential person in Wisconsin's dairy industry. I don't think he gets enough attention or credit. He was elected governor, as you see, later on, but this was well after he had been advocating that Wisconsin build a dairy industry to regenerate its soils. He started Horde's Dairymen, which is basically the Bible of the dairy industry. It's alive and well still today, still run by relatives of the original W.D. Horde. It's an amazing story. As I mentioned, Jossi, I missed the wrong button. So, University of Wisconsin at that time recognized what was happening, that Wisconsin needed to diversify and build upon the dairy industry that was just beginning, and they established the first dairy school in the United States. And so, still today, University of Wisconsin's School of Dairy is among the best, certainly in the United States, but also in the world. Babcock, Stephen Babcock gave Something I'm missing here? Yeah. A Babcock ice cream, of course. Well, thank God for Stephen Babcock, for more reasons than ice cream. You know, he developed the butterfat test, which allowed farmers to place a value on the value of their milk. And it was amazing that he developed this test by himself and then gave it to the world. And when you think, if he had patented it, it would have generated billions of dollars. But he thought, and then this was the thinking at the time, that the world needed this development so that the industry could grow and flourish. It's really one of the most remarkable gifts that a university or an individual has ever given to the world. So the University of Wisconsin, also over in River Falls, they developed all kinds of developments over the years. It did a lot of experimenting. There was a time when people thought that silos would damage the milk, sour the milk, and of course that was proven not to be the case. So as we grow, we're up to 1899. We've got 1,500 cheese factories in the state. And of course, these are not the factories that we know today. They were small, very small operations, usually a cheesemaker, perhaps his wife, a son, collecting this milk. Often it was a co-op owned by the farmers who brought their milk to the factory virtually every day. There was no way to keep the milk for very long. What's really remarkable is you look at that 90% figure. 90% of the farms in the state of Wisconsin had milk cows. And then, of course, today, the dairy industry is the largest segment of agriculture. It represents almost half of agriculture in the state of Wisconsin. But we're right now, and we'll cover this a little bit more later, but we're at about 9,500 farms in the state of Wisconsin, down from, I think the high water mark was 180,000 individual dairy farms in the state. Of course, those were very small operations, many of them. My father's farm is a 40-acre farm, and that would have been considered one of those dairy operations. And there was a time when a 40-acre farm could produce enough milk. Of course, they weren't just dairy farms. They also had hogs, and they were very diversified operations. They would have had chickens as well. And altogether, that was enough to raise a family. Nobody got rich, but they had a life, a good life in many cases. So in 1910, the industry had continued to grow, and this was the year that Wisconsin became the nation's #1 cheese-producing state, passing New York. And New York's still mad about it. But it's doubtful that they'll ever regain that #1 slot. And you know, we often hear a lot about California. Now, Chris, who is the technician in the back, who's taking care of the sound and the video here, he says that we're recording this and this may go on television at some point, so I'm not going to say much about California. But you know, they have been saying for a long time that they're going to become the #1 cheese producer in the United States. And that probably won't happen. In fact, what we're hearing more and more is that because of some of the issues that they face out there, the state of Wisconsin may become the #1 dairy state. Again, we're still #1 in cheese production by a good margin. But California produces the most milk, they have the most cows, but there's all kinds of pressures on them. Farmers are leaving that state, going to other states in the West. Texas is seeing a lot of growth, New Mexico is seeing a lot of growth, Idaho. So I don't think that we've seen the last of this rearranging of the order of who's biggest and best. But there is one thing for sure, and that is that Wisconsin makes the best cheese in the United States. We have the awards to back it up. This is not a subjective topic. There are all kinds of cheese competitions, and Wisconsin cheesemakers dominate every significant cheese competition in the United States and a few others that are world cheese championships. So don't ever let anybody tell you that California makes the best cheese. So in 1912, we became the #1 producer of milk, passing New York at that time. So one of the things that has distinguished the dairy industry in Wisconsin is that we have established a level of expertise that no other state can match. We're the only state that requires a licensed cheesemaker to be on premise at all times during the making of cheese. There's no other state that requires this. We're the only state that has a master cheesemaker program. In fact, we're the only state in the Western Hemisphere that has a master cheesemaker program. To get into the program, you have to have been a licensed Wisconsin cheesemaker for 10 years to even apply. And that doesn't mean that you get in. Once you get in, it's a 3-year program of classwork, plant inspections, and then a final exam. And not everyone passes that exam. So it is very rigorous and something that I think that we can all be proud of if you care about quality cheese. So I said we're the first state to grade our cheese. And as I mentioned earlier, by 1928, actually, we had 2,800 cheese factories in the state. Any guess as to how many we have today? 130. 130. So, I mean, just like the farm numbers, as technology has improved, we're able to produce more with less manpower. I mean, you look at some of those old thrashing pictures that you see, you can count up to 15, 20 men standing in that photo next to that thrashing machine, and that just isn't necessary anymore. There are fewer and fewer people needed because of the mechanization of everything. Harry Steenbach is really one of the most remarkable people who gets so little attention. So as you can see, he developed a process by which rickets was eliminated at the University of Wisconsin. He was a farm boy from over on the eastern side of the state who went to the University of Wisconsin and never left. He passed away in Madison a number of years ago. But he was responsible eventually for establishing the Wisconsin Alumni Research Foundation, which is in charge of all patents developed at the UW-Madison and has generated billions of dollars for the university. So here's another shot of a cheese factory. The interesting thing about this is they're all basically the same. They have a place where the wagon comes through with the milk and drops it off. As you can see, there's some gentlemen standing there. Gentlemen, boy, I bet that guy was never called a gentleman. So they drop the milk off there, and there is where it's processed, on that right side. The cheesemaker generally and his family lived over the factory, but in this case, to the left. That was repeated over and over and over throughout the state of Wisconsin. Cheesemakers lived above the factory with their family. And there's still a lot of these old factories still in business today. There's one down in Lowell, Wisconsin, that's probably the oldest continuously operated cheese factory in the state of Wisconsin. That's over 100 years old. There's one in Theresa that has been making brick cheese for over 100 years. And they still use the same bricks that Joe Widmer's great-grandfather used on the first batch he ever made. And if you have a chance sometime, Theresa's down by Mayville. If you ever have a chance, stop in there because it's a unique factory because you walk in, and like most factories, they sell cheese right there in the front. But in this factory, you're basically in the manufacturing facility, and you can see all the vats, you can see all the guys working. One interesting thing, and something I don't really like to think about, but all those bricks that have been used for all these years, all the corners are rounded off. As I mentioned, the high water mark for the number of farms in the state of Wisconsin, the number of dairy farms in the state of Wisconsin was 180,000. So here we are in 1935, lots of people still on the land. And of course, our communities were very different in those days. We actually had small communities that were vital. A lot of these small communities up here in Marathon County, which is really, Marathon and Clark are at the very heart of the dairy industry. A lot of those small communities had their own high schools, and the rivalries between small towns were really thriving in those days. Now we have a very different situation. June Dairy Month was born in 1937, and some awfully garish advertising was developed to promote it. Scandalous, I should say. We added America's Dairyland to our license plates in 1939. So the dairy industry has always been kind of a place for politicians to play. And you can see Governor Heil there. He proclaimed in 1940 the state's first observance of June Dairy Month. It's become a big promotion month for our organization, certainly, but the dairy industry in general. It was born because there was we called it the spring flush. Cows went out on grass after eating stored forage just over the winter, and their production went way up. And of course, schools went on break, and so there was this glut of milk, and the idea was that we were going to encourage a lot of consumption to kick off the summer. Allison Dairyland, born in 1948. This is Margaret McGuire. She was the very first one. And this is a program that the Wisconsin Milk Marketing Board provides 50% of the funding for. A few years ago, the Secretary of Agriculture called us up and says, we are under a huge budget crunch here, and we're thinking about ending the program. Would you be willing to help us? And of course, Allison Dairyland, Wisconsin Milk Marketing Board, we had no choice. It's a nice program, and obviously she's very recognized wherever she goes. And so we go into schools with Alice. We call it our Alice Blitz program, and we go in and go into grade schools. And she's a rock star to grade schoolers. And she has a tremendous message to share about not only nutrition, but the economic impact of the dairy industry. So this has been a terrific program. So in 1957, the world's best cheese was named to be from Wisconsin. And then, as you know, this year, another cheese from Wisconsin was named the world's best in the World Cheese Championships. It was the first time since, I believe, 1977 that has occurred. So the quality of our cheeses continues to improve because of the investment that the dairy farmers of Wisconsin have made, the investment that cheesemakers have made in their careers. There used to be a time when cheesemakers would say, well, I can make cheese as good as the Europeans. Or my cheese is almost as good as Europe's. Now we don't worry about that anymore. Wisconsin truly produces some of the best cheese on earth. So making big pieces of cheese has always been an endeavor in the state of Wisconsin. This one is from 1964, when we made a 17-ton hunk of cheddar. Took it to the World's Fair, told everyone about it. The first dairy breakfast. This one really surprised me. I thought dairy breakfast had been going on for, forever. But no, the first dairy breakfast actually occurred in 1970. And now we have over 70 dairy breakfasts across the state of Wisconsin in the month of June. Actually, a couple of them are in the month of May, the late May. But I think the official number is 73 dairy breakfasts in the state of Wisconsin. And when people from other parts of the country hear that, they just cannot believe it. Because they'll just talk about, well, we do 3 in the state of Michigan. Like that's a big deal and we're supposed to be impressed. And these are put on. Are any of you involved in the county dairy leader groups that we have in the state? We have 63 Wisconsin county dairy leader groups, and these are volunteer organizations. Most of them are dairy farm families, and they do their own promotion of the dairy industry. They'll do sampling at grocery stores, but they're the ones who are responsible for putting on these dairy breakfasts. So when you have the chance next year, go to 1 or 2 or 3. I know one guy who went to 6 last June. Yeah. So it took us almost 100 years to get to the billion-pound mark in terms of our production. It had been a slow but very steady growth. And so we'll be seeing a slide shortly with another landmark. I had to put this in here. Our organization, the Wisconsin Milk Marketing Board, was established by an act of the state legislature. It's actually a law that the organization exists. Dairy farmers put in a total of 15 cents for every 100 pounds of milk their cows produce. 10 cents of it stays in Wisconsin to promote Wisconsin dairy products, and 5 cents goes to the National Dairy Board. So as part of this initiative established by farmers and the legislature, we have contributed money to establish the Center for Dairy Research at the University of Wisconsin. This is truly one of the finest research facilities in the world. There are 6 research facilities around the country, and the researchers at UW-Madison in Babcock Hall work with primarily cheese companies to develop new cheeses. There's a cheese that has been named Best in Show at the American Cheese Society's competition every year 3 times, and it was born about 1990. It's only been around that long, but that cheese was identified as perhaps one that would have a market in the United States at the Center for Dairy Research. They also do research on whey, and whey used to be spread in fields as a waste product. And now whey is in everything from lipstick to hand lotion, you name it. So those kinds of developments have been worked on at the Center for Dairy Research. Talking of big hunks of cheese again, this one was 20 million pounds. We called it the Belle of Wisconsin. I was actually a journalist working in New York City at this time, and surprisingly enough, I did a story on this. Little did I know that a few years later I'd be moving back to Wisconsin and be working on such projects. So, as you saw in 1972, we passed 1 billion pounds. 1992, we doubled that mark in just 20 years. And right now we're up at about 2.6 billion pounds, 2.7, somewhere in there. So we will hit 3 billion pounds, God willing. I told you already about the master program, really a unique program that no other state has. No other state has the infrastructure or the expertise to pull this off. There are other states. I don't mean to say that no other state produces great cheese. I mean, there's some really good cheese made in California, as there are in Pennsylvania, Vermont, New York. But when you look at the amount of cheese that we produce and the amount of awards that we win, we're clearly number 1. Specialty Cheese Institute, I wanted to include this because over the years, Wisconsin developed a reputation for being a commodity cheese producing state. Well, there's nothing wrong with that. But right now, about 75% of our cheese is considered commodity. You know, the everyday, off-the-shelf, orange cheese. You don't know who the cheesemaker is. He's a good one, I guarantee that. But the margins are low. So the state began to look at developing a specialty cheese industry years ago because the margins would be better for the farmer. They would get more for their milk, perhaps. And so we began to emphasize this area, and it has really taken off. So as you can see, just over the last 10 years, we have doubled our production of specialty cheese. Right now, by our estimates, we have about a 46 share of all specialty cheese in the United States, which is incredible. I mean, when you look at, cars, for example, if we looked at BMW, Mercedes, and Audi, and we added all of their market shares together, it wouldn't be 46%. So we really are the big cheese. Sorry. I didn't really plan on saying that, it just came out. Another area that we've focused on is sustainability. I mean, we know that there are issues. Manure runs downhill. Sometimes it runs into creeks and lakes, and we're doing everything that we can to figure out ways that we can keep this from happening. It's been happening ever since there was animals and manure. But the dairy industry has been investing a great deal of money in what we call the Discovery Farm program. These are on-farm tests and studies to figure out the best way to handle this. We know that March and June are the two most dangerous months when it comes to handling manure. March, there's frozen ground and rain. In June, we get a lot of rain, and we're cleaning out barns and putting manure on the field. So we know that those are the two times of the year we really have to be careful. And I'm proud to say that the dairy industry is working very hard at this. The economic impact has been a story that we've been talking about for about 15 years. I joined WMMB 15 years ago. And at that time, it seemed like the attitude in the state was that the dairy industry was dying and going away. Because every month, the Department of Agriculture put out the number of farms in the state. And every month, the number of farms went down. And of course, it's been going down every month since probably 1946. And so there was this attitude that the dairy industry is dying, and pretty soon it's just going to be gone. California's going to take over, and it's over. So we began to talk about the economic impact of the dairy industry and the value that the dairy industry has on the state of Wisconsin, the number of jobs it generates. And our attitude is if you live in the state of Wisconsin, you're part of the dairy industry because you benefit from it. You benefit from the taxes that are paid, the roads that are built, the schools that are built, the jobs, et cetera. And you enjoy the Babcock ice cream and cheese. The Dairy Council of Wisconsin is a group that used to be independent of our organization. It had been independent for a long, long time. It goes into schools, talks about nutrition, and good lifelong habits. A few years ago, we consolidated with that organization, and they continue to do their work. It's a great group of people that go in. We have 8 people that work around the state with schools, with Alice in Dairyland. They're on television. They're up here in this market, I know. And they just do a tremendous job of educating people. It's not just about dairy. They talk about all foods and a good balanced diet. With the loss of home economics in our high schools, there's a lack of information about nutrition out there. I think they provide a valuable service. We may have all remembered in 2004 when the quarter was introduced, there were some people that were really upset that the Wisconsin quarter had a cow and a piece of cheese on it. I wasn't. I remember one of the other designs had pine trees on it. And I was thinking, there's about 50 other states that have pine trees. But there's only one state that can claim to be America's Dairyland, so I was really happy when this happened. So every 5 years, we go back, we measure the economic impact of the dairy industry. We found out that 5 years later, it was $26.5 billion. 180,000 jobs generated by the dairy industry in food processing, on dairy farms, cheese factories, all over the state. We're not counting the number of jobs generated at retail, which has, there are a lot of jobs created at supermarkets, specialty cheese shops, et cetera. This is a really interesting stat. Most people don't know. We're the 4th largest cheese manufacturer on earth. If we counted our production alone, we would be number 4. And in 2010, we passed Italy. So this is what it looks like when we look at the world's cheese production. That 11.51 is minus Wisconsin's production. So the United States is still the #1 cheese producer in the world, followed by France and Germany, and on down the line. So I find this just amazing. That a state of what are we, 56,000 square miles? Italy is probably twice that, maybe 3 times that. I don't know what the square mileage of Italy is. France is much bigger than the state of Wisconsin. It's incredible how much dairy we generate. And then 5 years later, we took another look at the economic impact, and lo and behold, we found that we were continually growing, that the economic impact of the state continued to grow, not go down, despite the fact that the number of farms continues to drop. The key is that the number of cows in the state, for the first time, actually began to grow about 2005. They had gone down 16 years in a row, the number of cows. So it hasn't gone up a lot. In fact, today we have half as many cows in the state of Wisconsin as we had in 1945. That's hard to believe when you read about the growth of large farms in the state. Half as many cows today as we had in 1945. Biodigesters, Wisconsin has more of them than any other state in the country. This is another step that we're taking to try to keep our waters clean. So as I said, we have 9,500 farms in the state, almost 1.3 million cows, and we're producing a lot of milk. When I started at WMMB 15 years ago, Wisconsin, I think, ranked 22nd in the nation in per cow production. And we've seen a lot of growth in that area. I think North Carolina had a higher per cow average than the state of Wisconsin did at that time. Now we're in the top 10. But there's been a lot of change over the last 15 years. As I've mentioned, we dominate these cheese competitions. This is, as I said, the only objective evaluation of quality out there. And we produce some of the best cheese on earth. So let's talk about the infrastructure a little bit. As I mentioned, we have one of the most well-integrated infrastructures in the world. It's what separates us. As I was driving up this morning, fighting the fog, I was thinking about the quality of our roads. And one of the reasons why there aren't that many gravel roads left in the state of Wisconsin is because we need to move milk to market. So all those big milk trucks, they have a hard time with gravel, and that's why we don't have that many anymore. This is what our infrastructure looks like when we commit it to a map. These are where our farms are. As you can see, this is there's a hole in the middle. This is called the dairy donut. Those farms were established on the best ground, of course, but they were also positioned to feed cities, feed the population. Whoops. So these is where our cheesemakers are. We have 1,200 licensed cheesemakers, which is by far more than any other. I think with our 130 cheese factories in Wisconsin, we have twice as many as the state of California, which is second. I think they have somewhere in the 60s, 62 or so. These are our cheese, milk, and butter plants, transport firms, and this is what the combined infrastructure looks like. That doesn't include all the universities, River Falls, Platteville, UW Marathon has programs. There's a tech school up here that has a very hearty dairy program. It's pretty incredible. A few years ago, we went out and we asked consumers, when they think of cheese in a geography, what do you think of? And this was the result that we got, that Wisconsin overwhelmingly is known for cheese. Imagine now if we weren't known for cheese at all, and we wanted to build a brand like this, where we were recognized across the nation for the cheese production. We couldn't afford to do it. It would take about 150 years to do what we have. But I wanted to also address milk consumption, because it's not all rosy. There's some tough issues that we face as an industry. Milk consumption has dropped 25% in the last 23 years. And People want to know why that has happened. Well, lifestyles have changed. Families are smaller. We don't eat together anymore. But probably the biggest reason is that there's a lot more competition today than there ever was before. There are hundreds of competing products out there that didn't exist in the 40s and 50s. So I put together this chart to kind of show how the beverage category has evolved over time. So as you can see, it's completely different today than it ever used to be. And it will probably continue to get more competitive. There are some positive signs out there that consumers want to return to simpler fare, more natural products. And there are a few products that are as natural as milk. So we'll continue to promote the nutritional value of dairy products, particularly milk, but it's going to be an uphill climb. But there's been some great news. Everybody in this room, I'll bet, eats yogurt. Yogurt consumption is up probably something like 300% over the last 25 years. And even butter consumption is up just 10% over the last decade. 24% here. That's a number that I have not seen so far, but I love it. Time magazine certainly gave us a boost when they put butter on their cover a few years ago. Per capita cheese consumption, it's doubled since 1975. And over the last decade, as you can see, it's up 12%. Here's the big number. Total milk usage has gone up almost 50% over the last 25 years. So a lot of this is due to the research that we do at the University of Wisconsin and the other research facilities around the country. The quality of our cheese continues to improve. There's no question about that. And the diverse number of cheeses that we make. Today, Wisconsin produces over 600 varieties, types, and styles of cheese, which is far more than any other state. So this is a look at other countries and how much cheese they eat. Now, what's really interesting about this one is that Greece is not on the list, and Greece consumes the most cheese per capita of any country in the world. But because of their economic problems, they didn't do the research last year. So we don't have them on here. But I think the last time they were on this list, it was 64 pounds per person in Greece. So this is great news for guys like me, because it says we got some room for growth. So I wanted to shift gears a little bit and tell you a little bit more about the kinds of work that we do at the Wisconsin Milk Marketing Board. Last year, we generated 2.2 billion consumer impressions. We don't make a product. We don't sell cheese. We don't sell milk, cottage cheese. How many of you eat cottage cheese, by the way? Show of hands. See, that's amazing. Thank you. Cottage cheese appears to be dying. And per capita consumption is down below 4 pounds per person now. And I think it's a great product. But younger people, they don't eat it. So keep it up. These are some of the ads that we run. We run ads in national magazines every month. What we decided that we wanted to do is, rather than tell these hard-hitting stories of how great our cheese is, we decided we need to have some fun. Cheese is fun. It tastes great, and so we developed these ads using a fashion photographer to shoot the cheese. I'm not kidding. Cheese had never been shot this way before. So we went to New York and hired a fashion photographer, and he lit it in unusual ways and added these side items, and it is just the testing. We test all of our ads, and the testing is off the charts. So we're really happy with what's happening with our advertising, because the way we look at it is we only get 3 seconds to stop a consumer as they're paging through a magazine. So we want to build a speed bump that makes you slow down. And we think that we've done that with these ads. So please watch for them. This is my favorite. Hello, tall, golden, and delicious. That's a piece of Gouda that's made just up here on Highway 29. Marieke. She's amazing. Has anybody met Marieke? She is amazing. So we're using a lot of social media. In fact, that reminds me. Everybody here has cell phones, I assume. And everybody here, I assume, does selfies with their grandkids, right? So hopefully you won't mind if I post that later today. So these are some of the messages that we share with consumers. Social media is an everyday thing on all kinds of different platforms, so we're busy here. The other thing I would love for you to do is take a look at this. This is our online magazine. It is gorgeous. It looks like Martha Stewart did it. And it came out of our office. I'm so proud of it. 2.8, sometimes we pass 3 million consumer impressions per edition. We also do some of the fundamentals. We bring editors into the state regularly. We put them on a bus and we take them to farms and cheese factories. And when you bring an editor from New York City to Wisconsin and get them on a farm, it's amazing. Many of them have never been on a farm. Virtually none of them have been in a cheese factory. So it's really incredible. And once they taste the cheese, they are sold. Years ago, I used to call on editors myself. I don't get to do that anymore. But it was always the first thing out of their mouth was, what about the fat? And we don't get that at all anymore. It's really been a remarkable turnaround. Editors now understand that cheese tastes good and fat tastes good, and it's not going to kill you. This is our home website. We have over 3,000 recipes on there, so I would encourage you to go to eatwisconsincheese.com. The Cheese and Burger Society is a website that we developed a few years ago. This is called food porn. So here we have 40 cheeseburgers that are the most ridiculous cheeseburgers you've ever seen, but we have had visitors from every country on earth except North Korea. And we don't care. We also have the largest collection of mac and cheese recipes on earth. And then the grilled cheese site that we have is just amazing. When we first talked about building a website just for grilled cheese sandwiches, people thought we were crazy. But we did it, and now we have a national grilled cheese sandwich retail promotion every year with a $15,000 prize for the best recipe. So it's really been a huge hit. Now we're seeing whole restaurant concepts developed around this website, which is amazing. So this is just a piece of promotional material that we use. These are some of the retail operations that we work with. If somebody ever tells you they can't find Wisconsin cheese in their grocery store, do not believe them. Unless they're maybe in Hawaii, maybe, I don't know. But we are in every state in the country. These are some of the food service operators that we work with. Culver's has been a tremendous partner of ours for many years. So let's talk a little bit about consumer attitudes. As I said, people thought that the dairy industry was going away. And as I just said, we use a lot of social media now. And social media is a wonderful thing. It allows you to reach a lot of people efficiently. But it also gives people who have opinions to express those opinions. And so it's a constant conversation that goes on about perceptions. And what we're finding is that there are some people that don't like the dairy industry, which is hard to believe, I know, for us. But there are a number of people that don't like the dairy industry. And so we're in a constant conversation with not only those people, but other people, giving them information about the value of the dairy industry, the contributions the dairy industry makes. So this is just an infographic that we have shared on social media about the impact of the dairy industry. This one has been used by virtually every politician in the state of Wisconsin for about 10 years, talking about the impact of the dairy industry. We found in some focus groups that consumers needed some perspective. When you say the industry is $43.4 billion, that really doesn't tell them how big it is until you compare it to something else. And so we looked at other states' well-known industries like Idaho's, Idaho potatoes and Florida's citrus industry. We found that the dairy industry in Wisconsin is much, much larger than those industries that are also well-known. Antibiotics in milk. There are no antibiotics in milk, period. Every ounce of milk is tested. If there is a trace of antibiotics found in milk, it is thrown away. And they trace that back to the farm where it may have come from. And that farmer pays for that entire load of milk. There is a huge incentive not to have antibiotics in your milk. So these are just posts that we put on social media. I want to end, this is my last slide, and then we'll have some time for some questions and perhaps a few answers if I know them. But I wanted to share this video with you because this is also part of what we're doing on social media. We want to tell people what happens on a farm in a simple way. So there are, in this video, it's mostly just sound, music. So Chris, if you could play this, it would be great.
Well, better get to it.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you so much.